Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. Today is January 7th, 2025, and if you can kind of tell from the song title, tonight is going to be a class on the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. This was the 2,800-strong American volunteer brigade that went over to fight the fascists in Spain in 1937. So we will be having a class on them tonight. We will also be showing some videos from the veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade archive, as well as some other footage of documentaries about the Spanish Civil War. As always, the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies is a Party of Communists-sponsored school, so this does allow us a wide range of topics and discussions. So, for tonight, we will be going over three sections. Our first section will be kind of the why was the Abraham Lincoln Brigades formed, a little bit of a background to the Spanish Civil War. We will then also discuss what the Abraham Lincoln Brigades did in Spain, and as well what was their legacy. And so we will start with the first section of why the Abraham Lincoln Brigades were formed. And Comrade, this is your section. You have the floor, sir.
All right. Why the Abraham Lincoln Brigade was formed. So, the context, the rise of fascism. As of the 7th Congress of the Comintern, which is the Communist International, in 1935, the international communist movement had identified fascism as the greatest threat to the development of working class power. Thus, new emphasis was on combining all anti-fascist elements into the popular front against fascism. What was happening in Spain? In 1931, the prior king abdicated the throne of Spain. Republicans had won the election in 1936. In response, nationalist forces led by Franco in English, launched a coup uprising in July that overran southern Spain and surrounded Madrid. Workers and peasants, men and women, rose up to defend the Spanish Republic. Stalin himself said of the anti-fascist struggle in Spain that the liberation of Spain from the aggression of the fascist reactionaries is not the private affair of the Spanish people, but the common cause of all advanced and progressive mankind. What was happening in Spain? Her Heroic Spain by Andre Marti, member of the Executive Committee of the Communist International. At the end of April, there was considerable improvement in the military situation as a whole. The month of February saw the fascists who had taken Malaga held back at Motril. But above all, their great offensive against Harmara not only failed to cut Madrid off from Valencia, but resulted in a crushing defeat and seriously exhausted their best troops. March brought the Republican forces a great victory at Guadalajara, their first since the beginning of the war. The defeat of the Italian fascist divisions had such military and political consequences in Spain, such political consequences in Italy and throughout the whole world, that certain quote-unquote well-intentioned spirits from London and Paris, who refused to move a finger so long as the Republican forces were being beaten, or when the women and children were being massacred, were immediately moved to talk about mediation and to demand that an armistice be concluded. Then there was the difficult Republican counteroffensive of March and April on the Southern Front, the occupation of the mercury mines of Almaden, and the success of Pozo Blanco. The Communist Party USA, CPUSA, decided to send people over to Spain to fight against the fascists. During the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, almost 40,000 men and women from 52 countries, including 2,800 Americans, volunteered to travel to Spain and join the international brigades to help fight fascism. The U.S. volunteers served in various units and came to be known collectively as the Abraham Lincoln Brigade.
Thank you, comrade. And we have a short video. This is a segment from the movie The Good Fight, which was a documentary of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and the Spanish Civil War.
In November 1936, the defense of Madrid was near collapse.
Barricades rise on the roads to Madrid as General Franco's advancing insurgents consolidate their blood-bought gains and press on to Spain's beleaguered capital. The guns still sing their hymn of death after weeks of desperate fighting. One suburb after another is invaded by Franco's troops. One by one, the capital's outposts fall.
With Madrid on the verge of capture, help arrived from around the world. They came from France, Poland, Sweden, Cuba, Yugoslavia, England, and Peru. There were German and Italian volunteers, some of whom had escaped from concentration camps. From 52 countries in all, 40,000 volunteers arrived to fight alongside the Spanish workers and peasants. In America, Steve Nelson first heard about the International Brigades while organizing for the Communist Party in the coal fields of Pennsylvania.
When we read that Englishmen were going, then we said, hey, what about us? And the party committee in New York responded to that, set up a committee and sent out word to the various districts of the party, as we used to call it, various state committees, and told them that this is going on, and if there are people who would volunteer, to get in touch with them.
Recruitment for the Lincoln Brigade was done by word of mouth and through ads pretending to seek workers for Spain. This effort was organized by the Communist Party, yet many of the volunteers were not communists.
I'm not going to just sit down and let this happen. I'm going out and help, even if it is my life. But I'm helping. This is my world, too. And I'm not going to sit down and just let people do what they want to do when it's wrong. And I'm a nurse. Look at all those soldiers and all those people being hurt. Look at all the people even in Spain, young children not being bombed, taken care of and all of that. Women, men, everybody. And I was doing crisis duty.
It seemed like a perfectly natural thing to do. I mean, I knew what oppression was. I'd had it all my life when I was a kid. And it didn't seem like any effort or took any thinking at all. I didn't need politics. I mean, they were oppressing the Spanish people, so I knew what that meant. So I wanted to go and help. Very simple.
A combination of all these things, evidently going right back to my childhood in the slums. And I was working class. I was part of the American working class. And it was an opportunity for me to fish cut bait, to join my friends and fight fascism.
Evelyn Hutchins wanted to go as a soldier, but American women were only allowed to serve as nurses. She then tried to volunteer as an ambulance driver.
I asked them if they knew how good I was at driving, and they knew because they were using me all the time. I asked them if they would have allowed me to go if I had been a man, and they admitted they would have, and even my size, as small as I am, because two of the other ambulance drivers were my size, you know. So I told them, well, if you don't let me go, then you're just a chauvinist. That's all. A male chauvinist. You're just a chauvinist, and you're not supposed to be, because you're supposed to be a political person. Well, then they would say, I'm not like that. I would let you go, but it's the others. So my attitude was, you let me take care of the others.
I was living with my cousin, and he was exactly the same frame of mind. And he said, well, we ought to make a pact. He said that not one of us leaves without telling the other guy he's going, so that we can go together. And I said, that sounds like a winner. And then I got thinking about it. And this cousin is 3 or 4 years younger than I. And we have a tremendous family. And I think maybe I was a little more considered the radical of the two of us. And I thought, gee, if he and I leave together and he croaks and I come back, I won't be able to face the family. I won't be able to face the family. They'll say, oh, Dave talked Jim into going, and Jim's dead, and I won't be able to face the family. So I broke the pact. But I finally told Jim, I said, Jim, tomorrow I think I'm leaving for Spain. And he called me every kind of a son of a bitch that you can call a guy. And he was over there 10 days later.
And then when I was accepted and I was in the pipeline, so to speak, then it hit me, the enormity of what I was doing. And then I had to accommodate myself to the idea, and my mother to the idea, for instance.
And how the hell do you explain this stuff to your mother, that you're going off to possibly get killed or stuff like that? Very difficult thing. I found it very hard.
But I convinced her that I was going over there to work in a factory.
So I decided to just say, look, I'm getting on a ship and it's going to Europe. Now, sometimes we go to these ports and you don't hear from me for months and months and months. Sometimes it's out of the way place. They don't have mail boxes or mail carriers or stuff like that. So don't worry if you don't hear from me for a long time.
I sent home letters telling her what great work I was doing in the factory and so forth, and turning out all these goods for the front. Until one day I got a letter from my sister that a picture of me and Hemingway had appeared in the Jewish Daily Forwards in the Rotogravure section. Milton Wolfe, captain in the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. Blew my cover completely.
And with that, we will break for our first discussion round. If you have a question or a comment, please use the raise hand function and we will get to you in the order that they go up. Really first, though, Emeritus Secretary Angelo, you have the floor.
Right. Can you all hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
People have to understand what Spain meant to us. Spain was to the generation that fought in World War II. That generation, Spain was to them what Vietnam was to my generation, those that were born in the baby boomers. And what today's campaign would be the Palestinian issue. So the passion that you had for Palestinians, what's happening to them in Gaza, is the same passion we had for this Spain. So you have to understand that. I suggest you watch the movie The Way We Were with Barbara Streisand. It opens up with her as a student at Brooklyn College, talking about supporting Republican Spain. That's how much it was a part of that generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
Yeah, I just want to say that those are great stories, and it reminded me of the New Outlook Publishers book we have. I think it's titled Trotskyism in Service of Franco, which is a really good book I read recently. And it talked about how Trotskyist or Trotskyist groups, they would sell over information to the Nazis or to like the fascists and they would literally hide armaments and munitions from the front lines. And I think there were a couple excerpts of people that volunteered in some of the sections where the Trotskyists were, I guess, leading. And they just talked about how miserable it was working with them because they were just so disorganized and like purposefully disorganized. And yep, that was all.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody else noticed this. The second to last person they interviewed there some of you might have recognized him. He was the same person who was in the documentary on the San Francisco general strike. So I just found the video on our YouTube. I looked it up. His name is Bill Bailey. And yeah, he's a Spanish Civil War veteran and also a member of the CPUSA. And I guess he lived in San Francisco in later part of his life. So just thought that was interesting. Same person.
Interesting. Good catch. Comrade Angelo, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, Bill Bailey, I want you to know who else he was. He was in the Merchant Marines, which did a lot of work against fascism on the waterfront. But Bill Bailey was one of the few people, and you should know this. There was a German ship before the war. There was a German ship docked in New York with the swastika hanging from the back of it, flowing in the breeze. Well, a couple of people from the CP, younger people, not on their own, but they had okay from the party, remember that, went and ripped down that swastika flag and took it with them. That's a very famous story. And Bill Bailey was one of those people. Remember what they were called? Premature anti-fascist. In other words, you were an anti-fascist too early. It's ridiculous. You should have not been an anti-fascist until later on. That's why they were called the premature anti-fascist. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
So I've heard a name regarding Abraham Lincoln Brigades. Maybe another comrade could comment. Who's Alva Bessie? And is Alva Bessie known for anything else?
Yes. Yes, Alva Bessie was one of the Hollywood 10. He was involved with Hollywood. In fact, he wrote a book on the Spanish Civil War by him. And Alva Bessie was one of the Hollywood 10 who was blacklisted for for being members of the Communist Party and also for going to Spain. They shouldn't have gone to Spain at that time. They were premature anti-fascists. In other words, it was okay to fight fascism after 1941. Why? Because the United States was bombed in 1941 and it got involved in the war. But before 1941, these people, the Hollywood 10, Alva Bessie, were not allowed to do that. So they were persecuted, yes.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
I just have a question about like the Trotskyists in service of Franco. It's just odd to me, like what was the reason that they went over to Spain just to, like sabotage the war efforts? Like what was their ideological justification for doing that?
Comrade Angelo, did you want to respond?
Yes. Very clear. Remember, Spain was the Popular Front. It was to save the Republic. The Trotskyites said we should not save the Republic. We should have a communist revolution, and which would in effect get rid of the Republic. So they were what we call the ultra left. Like we had so many times in history. The ultra left goes into a situation and makes it worse. And that's basically what happened with them in Spain. So they hurt the war effort by telling the workers, why are you fighting for Spain? Now, you should go complete. We have guns in our hands. Let's go for a workers' revolution. Thank you.
Well, we do know that there were some, Trotskyites and anarchists that went to Spain as well, but I think the Trotskyites that were especially referred to in Trotskyism in service of Franco was a group called the Workers' Party of Marxist Unity, which was in Spanish, the acronym is POUM.
The POUM.
I think
the POUM.
Yeah,
it was called the POUM.
Right. So I think it's talking about them who were already in Spain. They were the Trotskyites of Spain.
Thank you, comrade.
On that same topic, just of ultra leftists and anarchists, the anarchists were a relatively large element in comparison to other struggles in history. In the Spanish Civil War, they basically ended up taking over Catalonia, or they were trying to give defense of Catalonia over to the anarchists. But they also made a really big, mess up of the whole thing. But the anarchists to this day still call back to the Spanish Civil War and blame communists, especially Bolsheviks and what they call Stalinists, for the loss of the Republicans, as opposed to the other way around. Just want to mention it's still like an ideological debate between anarchists and communists to this day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I just wanted to point out, I recognize that name, Steve Nelson. He figured into the bootleg coal rebellion here in Pennsylvania, and he wrote a book called American Radical. Thank you, Joe, who just put it in the chat if people are interested.
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah, to answer about the anarchists and the Trotskyists. So yeah, the Spain government was a popular front with many forces. There were groups that would be considered liberal today. There were anarchist groups, which was very prevalent in the trade union movement in Spain. Particularly, Spain sort of has regions, if you will, like, Texas, California here, but more autonomous. And whenever you see the black and red flag, it's like usually split down the middle. That is the CNT-FAI. The CNT is like it would be like their AFL-CIO of the Spanish Republic. It was heavily dominated by anarchists who were at loggerheads with communists. And a famous Trotskyist was George Orwell. And it has since been published, by the way, I want to say it was as recent as like 2013, that George Orwell was completing lists of people who were communists. Like people who went to Spain, people in the British government, communists of all over, as early as when he was in Spain. And so George Orwell wrote a book, by the way. I read it when I was in high school. I forget what he calls it, but he wrote a memoir, if you will, of his time in Spain. And he really didn't fight anybody, except he ended up fighting other Republican forces. And the books, which I'd like General Secretary Joe to speak about, because I think we're planning on publishing these with New Outlook Publishers this year or next. So an American communist named Edwin Rolfe wrote books. Alba Bessie wrote books as well, multiple books, but Edwin Rolfe has the most definitive book with maps and everything, photos. And from what I understand, one of the reasons the Spanish Republic was defeated was internal strife. And it was mainly the Catalonia region, as the comrade mentioned earlier, Barcelona. It was even called the Barcelona Days. The Trotskyists ran an uprising against the Republican government. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade.
Hey, I just want to mention bringing up the POUM and Comrade National Check bringing up the CNT in Spain. I'm going to link up both of them together. Andreas Nin, who ended up being the leader of the POUM, he was a member of CNT early on. He actually became a communist when he was sent by the CNT to Moscow for the Third Congress of the Comintern and the founding Congress of the Profintern, or the Red International Trade Unions. Later on, he ended up joining the left opposition in 26. Before this, he had actually written a book that was published by the Trade Union Educational League on trade unions and the fight against fascism. And then, he ended up being a turncoat and working with the POUM. The POUM, the Trotskyists, we can't forget, essentially backstabbed the Spanish Republic and started working with Franco and the fascists.
Yes, the book, let's see if I'm wrong on this. The book that Orwell wrote that was very famous that we read all in high school was called Animal Farm. That was the book. You all should remember that name, in which he pokes fun. That whole book is to poke fun at the Soviet Union and socialism. That's what that book is about. The so-called some people are more equal than others. That's one of the quotes from that book. He was talking about the animals. But that's number one. The other thing is that the um, the word turncoat for new people here is very important. The turncoat is one who was with us at one point in their life and then turns against them and actually wants to kill them. And that's what a turncoat is. And we have a lot of those in the communist movement, unfortunately. Right? And another book he had wrote, others wrote, well, Homage to Catalonia. That's right. That was another book. But those were written all by Trotskyites. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
George Orwell was used to collect names. He was collecting names for the military intelligence 6, MI6, or maybe it was MI5, I forget which one. But similarly, there was a character or a person named Laszlo Rake of Hungary, who was in the Communist Party of Hungary before, the end of the war. But during the Spanish Civil War, he actually went to Spain for the war along with his comrades. But once he got back, he was captured. He was a student. He was captured, and his cousin, who was a police officer for the Horthy government, told him if he wanted to be free, he had to work for the Horthy government. So he created a list for the Horthy government. And during after World War II, he helped provide a list to the counter-revolutionaries that wanted to restore Horthy
60 seconds.
Cardinal Minzenzi's regime.
Thank you. We will now go on to our second section, which will be some of the action and what the Abraham Lincoln Brigade did. This will be a bit of a shorter section, and then we'll be ending the section with a song from Pete Seeger about the 15th International Brigade, which is the Abraham Lincoln Brigade was part of. So, Comrade Andrea, you have this section. You have the floor.
All right. What the Abraham Lincoln Brigade did. Action seen by the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. The Battle of Jarama, offensive in Brunete, defense of Madrid, and Aragon offensive. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade had the first black leader of an American military unit, Oliver Law. He died in action in the Civil War in 1937 at Mosquito Hill. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade was formed in with the 15th International Brigade, along with UK Skalatvala Brigade and the Dimitrov Battalion and the 6th February Battalion. Republicans and brigade betrayed by the PUM, Trotskyists. Guadalajara was a very heavy defeat for the Spanish and Italian fascists. It could have been made a disaster for them had the Republican divisions been relieved by bringing in fresh divisions. This was impossible. There were no reserves. The Spanish people understand the need for building up reserves, but they are only being built up extremely slowly. Why? For the one thing, because over entire areas of the country, in Catalonia, for example, the Trotskyites, including POM, numerous anarchist leaders and organizations, for 5 months refused to apply the decree for the general mobilization of the 5 classes renewed in February. And because Largo Calabero, president of the council and minister of war, did nothing to enforce its application. In addition, regional military authorities made the absence of barracks for the recruits a pretext for sending them home, and the Minister of War did not intervene at all. Finally, in entire regions like Catalonia, the Republican army is not yet organized as it is in the rest of Spain. On the Aragon front, the armed forces are still divided up according to parties and trade union organizations. This is what led to the disasters suffered in August, September, and October in the Valley of Tagus.
Thank you, Comrade Andrea. And we'll now go to a song about the 15th Regiment from Pete Seeger and the Almanac Singers.
El 10 8 de julio en el patio de un convento, el pueblo madrileño con el quinto regimiento. Venga, jaleo, jaleo, sueño de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo. Con Lister y Campesino, con Galán y con Modesto, con el comandante Carlos, no hay miliciano con miedo. Venga, jaleo, jaleo, sueño de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo. Son los 4 batallones que Madrid están defendiendo. Se va lo mejor de España, la flor más roja del pueblo. Venga, jaleo, jaleo, sueño de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo. Con el quinto, con el quinto regimiento, Madrid yo me voy al frente para las líneas de fuego. Venga, jaleo, jaleo, sueño de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo.
All right. So we'll now go to our next discussion round. Comrade Andrea, you have the floor. Go ahead.
So yeah, in the last section, we've learned that the cause itself was inherently destroyed from the inside by the Trotskyists. But I wanted to ask a question. Mussolini sent planes, Hitler sent tanks. Apart from the brigades, did any other comrades send, like, did Stalin send or try to send any ships or tanks, or was Spain kind of left on their own? Thank you.
Yeah, so the Soviet Union became the biggest benefactor of the Spanish Republic. So was Mexico, actually. A lot of the arms that were in Spain came from Mexico, like the rifles. The rifle was actually called like Mexicansky. It's like a type of Mauser, which is like a German rifle, I believe. At this time, you know, Mexico had just gone through the Mexican Revolution, which does not end the way communists wanted it, but it still ended in a very progressive government, which at the time was participating in the mass organizations of the Soviet Union. There was like a Caribbean anti-imperialist grouping, for example. And Mexico City itself was like the Wild West of communists. Like you had communists from all over the world, Spanish-speaking world. Fidel Castro, for example, was even there. But this would have been the time before Castro. One of the best, well, my favorite propaganda pieces from the Spanish Civil War is this picture of a boat, and it's like leaving, and it has the water trail, and it's like it looks like it's just kind of leaving off into the distance, and above it is a hammer and sickle, like in the sky, and the message is like, you know, from the Soviet Union. By the way, the Air Force of the Spanish Republic, these would have been like the planes in the 1930s. They were like propeller planes, and they kind of look like bumblebees. Very famous Soviet plane. It actually dominated at the time, believe it or not. It dominated all the fascist things. Um, so that's that. By the way, the French government had huge munitions and all this stuff right across the border, but they locked it all up, and it was a Popular Front government at the time. But yeah, the Soviet Union was definitely the biggest benefactor with tanks and everything, new military training. But I'd raise my hand for a separate reason. I just wanted to answer that.
Thank you, Carmack. And would it surprise anyone that the British were the ones that had pressured the French government to get in the neutrality pact and to not get involved? But you had something else, Carmack?
Yeah, so that last song is a very good song. It talks about, in particular, by the way, there's different versions of it. It's called Ay Carmela, or it's also called Anda Jaleo. And it's like a take on like a Spanish flamenco song. If comrades should search it up in their own time, it's kind of cool. It has a nice beat to it, but it's a communist song, and it sings about in particular, the International Brigade of the Communists that held Madrid in the early days of the war and basically saved the republic. And I raised my hand to explain the lyrics of that song. It talks about four generals. The four generals were all communists. One was Galan, one was Modesto, one was Lister, and then one was Campesino. And Campesino, kind of funny, it means like peasant or like farm person. They don't really know his background too much, but he almost looked like indigenous. He had been from like Latin America. I could be wrong on that, but anyways, they were all communists. That Edwin Rolfe book has a really good chapter on Campesino and another indigenous-looking communist who fought for him. But very interesting with those communists. I think it was Lister when the Spanish Party went through its Euro-communist phase in the 70s. Lister, he stayed a lifelong communist, and he had formed like a group against the Euro-communists, but he rejoined that party, the Communist Party of Spain, in the 90s before his death.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I know we've talked about some of the failures of like Trotskyites and their intervention in the Spanish Republic fight and all that type of stuff and the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. But what were some of the more positive interventions that those 52 countries and the 40,000 soldiers, what were they able to accomplish in Spain? Did it stop Spain from falling early? And what can we really look at as their positive fight for the liberty of Spain? Thanks.
Well, yeah, as mentioned, they basically saved Madrid. Franco would have captured Madrid at the opening of the war. As they say, whatever, like wars are always planned to be like 2 weeks, but then they last 5 years. The fascists would have won in like 2 weeks, just like like last month, Syria went down in like a week. That would have happened. So the communists kept it alive. And basically when the Spanish Civil War ended, by the way, World War II began. So Spanish Civil War, by extension, was really the beginning of World War II, because all across Europe, every country had its own fascism. Let's remember, Franco lived until like, 76 or something, because he made deals with the British. Guess what? There was a fascism in Portugal. There was a fascism in Poland, by the way, which actually worked with Hitler. Fascist Poland, made a non-aggression pact with Hitler before Hitler did that with Stalin. There was the Austrian-Hungarian fascism. And basically, why would all these communists go to Spain? Well, because in a lot of their other countries, they had been fascist. Like Italy had been fascist since the 20s.
Takes a second.
And, your family like went to death camps and stuff. And you were kind of, especially if you're Jewish, a lot of the communists, by the way, is kind of synonymous with Jewish at the time. So yeah, everybody went to Spain to fight. And they really fought. They kept the Spanish Republic alive until the war basically ended, as we mentioned, because of internal treason by Trotskyists. But then as soon as the Spanish Civil War ended, World War II began. So they just kept fighting.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade Angelo, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah. Comrade says, what did they do? The biggest thing in my mind is they forged for the first time an attempt by the world to stop fascism. Remember, Hitler did Sudetenland. He did Austria, the Anschluss. Nobody did anything. It was the first time that people stood up and said, in fact, I'll give you the quote from Dolores Ibárruri, who was the general secretary of the Spanish Communist Party. She said, they shall not pass. That's an important slogan. They shall not pass. So for the first time, we're standing up and we're telling them no. And before that, it was not done really at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention, since we were sort of talking about arts and culture earlier, there's a famous painter that everyone here knows. I'm pretty sure everyone knows. Pablo Picasso. He painted an interesting painting of a town called Guernica after the bombing by the Nazis and the fascists, or the Italian fascists. It's an abstract art piece, but really I wanted to bring this up because I think we always need to take the moment to recognize that these popular cultural figures were communist. Most people don't know that Pablo Picasso was a communist, but he was.
Thank you, Comrade. All right, and with that, we'll go on to our next section now. Our next section is going to be on the legacy of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade.
Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Many Lincoln veterans joined this group. This group was considered security risks by the Federal Bureau of Intelligence, the FBI, and J. Edgar Hoover. In 1947, they were placed on the Attorney General's list of subversive organizations, and they would keep this designation to at least 1970. The House Un-American Activities Committee blacklisted the veterans. They were denied military enlistment, government jobs, and promotions. The veterans would work in aid to anti-fascist and anti-imperialist struggles, including donating ambulances to the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. Ronald Reagan, in an interview, said the Lincoln Brigade veterans had fought on the wrong side, the other side, of course, being the fascists. Today, we have the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, or ALBA, and you see the URL there if you care to visit. Provides information and insight into the members of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and the Committee for the Defense of the Foreign Born, which was a historical mass organization of the old party, which provide legal defense to returning members who were denied admission into the U.S. after fighting for Spain. Upon return to the United States, many were labeled premature anti-fascists, a government euphemism for communists, and either denied entry, jobs, or other necessities.
My father, Steve Nelson, served with 2,800 other Americans in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. He also headed the Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade organization for over 50 years. Recently, the Brigade Archives, ALBA, received a wonderful gift, a collection of letters written by American volunteers in Spain. They had been asked to answer a simple question: why they fought. My father wrote, "I went to Spain because I realized, as did thousands of other members of the international brigades, that Spain could not be left alone in the face of Hitler and Mussolini's intervention." You are now about to hear children and grandchildren of Lincoln veterans read from these extraordinary testimonials. The idealism and spirit of resistance in these letters inspire us in our fight for human rights and against new threats of fascism today.
My name is Penny Demas. My father was Nick Demas. This is what he wrote on January 20th, 1938. I was born on the island of Cyprus, which is a British colony. My parents were peasants, and their living conditions were terrible. And although the island is very rich, I, as well as many others, had to leave the country and try and make a living in foreign lands. I have lived many years in Egypt, and then I came to the U.S. always trying to make good, but the odds were always against me. Though I was an able electrical mechanic, I could not succeed. I was getting conscious of the labor struggle every day more and more, and when the Spanish militarists and traders tried to take away from the Spanish people their hard-won liberties, I felt it was my duty as a conscious worker of democratic background and leanings to go there and to do as much as I could to stop the barbarians. Thank you, Daddy.
Abe Oshroff, my papa. 2 years ago, many Americans already realized that what was being fought in Spain was not a civil war, but a war of fascist foreign invasion, which menaced the peace of the entire world. A few thousand saw fit to take their place by the side of the heroic Spanish people. I was among them. Today, the majority of the American people understand the necessity for lifting the embargo on democratic Spain. If our only contribution was to bring about this understanding, then we have no regrets.
Hi, Wallach, my father. I volunteered to fight against fascism in Spain for all the peoples of the world, as well as for the United States. Stopping the advance of fascism was the most important task of the times.
Minnie Fuhr. We are so needed here. You cannot imagine. Even if I wanted to come home, doubt if I could. And Ida, I don't want to come home. Everything I have learned I can use here. Imagine working and knowing every step one takes is helping these men who are fighting our fight against fascism. It no longer is work. It is a rare opportunity. Does comforts matter or not? And when one had comfort for a night or a few hours, one enjoys it more intensely. Just gave out my last lousy Spanish cigarette. These are not ordinary soldiers dying, but going into the struggle against fascism for you and me, for the Spanish people and the whole world. I could weep when any of them go out before my eyes. The struggle is not 4,000 miles away, but affects everyone.
Edward Luschel McDaniel, Adjutant Commander, Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I was 19 months in Spain, 12 months on the front. With the Lincoln Brigade, I was in officers' training school, and I was in charge of machine gunners, groups, and instruction. I went to Spain to fight against the fascist invasion because I have had to suffer for the lack of freedom all my life as an American, principally from my miserable, downtrodden existence. I was born in the South. I went to Spain because these are some of the same sources that have not only deprived me of my freedom, but have enslaved the entire working class. I went to Spain because the reign of terror in fascist-ruled countries has only resulted in raising more racial discrimination, more killing, and more wholesale slaughter, using every kind of tactic to divide and split working people. This is a throwback for civilization.
Dozens of other brigade vets also wrote powerful letters that are now part of the ALBA archives. My father's letter was printed in the June 2020 edition of The Volunteer, the ALBA magazine. Over 80 years later, the Abraham Lincoln Brigade archives is still fighting the good fight, drawing on the example and progressive tradition of the volunteers who went to Spain. We conduct teaching institutes for hundreds of middle and high school teachers so that young people will continue to learn about the legacy of those who went to Spain. And we celebrate and support struggles for human rights today. The veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade survived on small collections, literally passing the hat to support their work. Now, ALBA is asking this generation to continue the tradition. We hope you will consider supporting ALBA's work.
All right.
Yeah, that was a great video from ALBA. Just to promote ALBA, give them a donation. I don't think it matters how much, but if you give them a donation, you'll get that magazine. I think it's like every season they have the volunteer. So this was the latest one. And so I would highly recommend all the comrades here to support ALBA. Real quick, I like that video. They were playing the International. They were playing Bella Ciao. What was the third song that was being played? I would like to know.
I Carmela.
Arcanella.
Yeah, it's the same one we listened to earlier. There's lots of different variations of it. I urge people to look it up.
I just got okay. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Comrade Angelo, you have the floor. Go ahead, sir.
This video was great by ALBA. I urge everybody here to send them a couple of drugs and get their publication. It is so important. It's like reading history. It goes beyond the veterans. It goes into the whole McCarthy period. And there are children who wrote in the magazine how their life was with the FBI hiding in the bushes when they were coming home from school. Amazing stuff. But on a personal level, I knew two of those people. Penny Dimas came from a Red family. I knew her sister, Joanne Damos, and they were Greeks. They were Greek communists, the whole family, and very active in the CP when I was in the CP. And the other one, I couldn't believe it. Hi Wallach, I met him. I met him because I had went to his house because I had a date with Nancy, his daughter. I'm talking about when I was about 22. I couldn't believe when I was seeing this. So I actually knew some of the people in this video. It brought back memories. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
Yeah, I still find it shocking that America, for lack of a better term, supports fascism, except when it doesn't. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we learned that from Ronald Reagan during this class. I know in another class I've heard the famous quote from Truman when he was a senator, I believe, during the FDR years, talking about Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. He said, well, if the Nazis are winning, let's give the Soviets some weapons. If the Soviets are winning, let's arm the Germans, so they'll just kill each other. But that said, I wanted to raise my hand. I forgot all about this. So there's a memorial created by the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Veterans Association, ALBA, in San Francisco. It's right there on the pier, as the comrades mentioned earlier, related to that waterfront strike, that famous strike that we've done another class before, I think with Luell, or maybe it was a labor school with Harry Bridges. I've been there. I have a picture of it. We have some, I know we have comrades who participate here from Northern California. So just like there's the Lenin statue in Seattle, I'm sure we'll have to go and take a picture of the ALBA Memorial in San Francisco. Or the next time you all visit there, please make sure to go down. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade.
Yes, it was Truman who said that the Nazis and the Soviet Union should fight each other and kill as many each other as possible, not FDR. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade. With that, we'll go to our wrap up. Next slide. New Outlook Publishers is our sister publishing house, and for an update on that, I will turn it over to comrades.
Please visit our partner publishing house, New Outlook Publishers. You can find a lot of great works there. And purchasing books from New Outlook Publishers helps support the school. Of course, the most relevant work for tonight's class, Trotskyism in the Service of Franco by Georgia Soria. You can find that and a lot of great works. Thank you.
And with that, we will go to our closing song, which is from the Weavers. Si me quieres escribir.